Hey there, continuing in my methods. In a previous video, I'd showed how to sort of lay out the pleats using one section of tartan to sort of get a general grasp and prediction of how things are going to go. And also developing from a previous video where I had applauded an effort to produce a beautiful kilt, but with some rather beginner's methods we'd like to avoid in the future. So I'm going to show you how I lay out, having determined my pleat widths at waist and at hip, and having played with the cloth to break down into elements and determine exactly where the marks are going to be, how I'd proceed from there. So I chalk out my aprons. Now I'd started, the waist is 38, the hip is 42. So I'd started initially at 19 and 19 for the waist, and done that in either end, chalked it out, allowed for a deep pleat, and then counted the number of repeats of the set. And having counted that, I came to 38 repeats of the set between the two aprons and between aprons plus their deep pleats. But we can't have an even number. We must have an odd number. I can't add one, so I'll subtract one. So now it's 37 maximum number of pleats. So between those two aprons, again, I counted and I found the center pleat, which I've marked here with an X, and measured it out with the tape. The total length, which is 24, the fell, which was 8.5, and then marked, there's the bottom of the fell, that chalk line there, and that chalk line is 2.5 inches down from, here's the top of the kilt is the white, 2.5 inches down is the middle of the strap and buckle. Now in a case like this, where our mark falls a little bit short or a little bit over a change in the tartan, it does no harm at all. In fact, there's several advantages, or one chief advantage, to just correcting it down or correcting it up that little bit, because it eliminates cumulative error in the future. So if my mark for the bottom of the fell comes just a little bit short or a little bit over, it's allowable. In fact, it's actually a good idea just to nudge it down to that spot so that we can reliably have these seams the same length. It prevents a complication in the future. So I've marked the width of the pleat at the bottom of the fell and the width of the pleat between the top of the kilt and the center of the strap. Because remember, a man's kilt tapers to that point and then is parallel thereafter. A woman's kilt, the taper is continuous throughout, top to bottom. So having marked that, now if I'm confident enough that I did my first marks directly on the finished place, it's not a bad idea. In fact, it's a good idea if you're just starting out, or if you've experienced with this but you haven't done it for a while, to do your marks up here on the extra bit of cloth, because there's a really good chance that you'll not get it right the first time, or you'll learn something new the first time, and then you have to go back, and now you got two sets of marks. In that case, I'll switch colors. Right now I'm using yellow chalk, but if I had to go back and do it over, I would switch to white chalk. And then if problems or complications still persist, I can easily iron this out, because this is wax chalk. With a warm iron, just a pass of the warm iron, we'll remove these marks and you can start again. Because it's important that we have this absolutely right before we harm the material. Until we rip it to its finished height, we can keep playing with this forever practically. So what I've done, again, there's my center of my back pleat, because remember, the center element of the front apron is that yellow line, so we're going to have the same center element in the middle back pleat. So I mark it. And I start off marking at the hip, and then later I come back and mark at the waist. If you were marking up here, you just use your hip measurement, because it's the wider one. Okay. There will be a couple of points I will bring up later in a different video when we're dealing with laying out the pleats on a very crowded, a very busy tartan. But we'll save that for later to eliminate confusion now. So I've marked the first one, right? And then I go to the next element of the tartan, the same element of the tartan, one set over, which is that yellow line, and I put my gauge on the same spot, but then I only mark one side. I mark the right-hand side. And then I center my gauge, right? And mark the other side. And now I go to the next element of the tartan, but instead of going 1, 2, 3, I'd already determined that the third element of my tartan here, yellow line, black, the third element is this break here. So I'm gonna line this up and then mark it. And I'll back up. Actually, this is the logical place to bring it up, not earlier. To find that spot, I could have gone, this is the center, I could have gone there and marked, or alternately, I could have gone there and marked. In fact, in some tartans, I might do this, I might do both. I could mark on that side, because if this interval winds up being wider, say that's 3/4 of an inch, that's 3/4 of an inch, but this is a little bit bigger. Let's say this width is actually 7/8 or even greater. What I would do then is center my, in fact, I'm going to use just a different colored chalk just to make this point. There's some white. Let's imagine that interval, see how much wider that is? Can you see it accurately with the picture? See how much wider that is than the desired width. If I'd made those marks from marking there and marking there, I would put my gauge in the middle and equalize it and then mark it. And it's by that way that we can manage the degree of error. Do you remember how the error had compounded for that gifted amateur's kilt that I was just talking about, that alteration, where error compounds, and then they've reached a corner where they have to do something drastic, which is basically have two pleats right on top of the other, right? So by managing managing error like that, we prevent it from accumulating. So having done that, see, I just keep repeating this. So there's my center back pleat. So I just keep going. The next element, again, I'd marked it there, centered on the black line. Now, again, the element after this is this space here with no element of the tartan to mark against. So again, I'd gone to the center of the next element, which is the black line on green, and marked it, and then gone over here like that. And then on we go. The next one is centered, and we just keep repeating that to the end. And I had done that all the way, looking ahead to, here was the edge of my kilt, and I'd come to here, right, and marked it. Now I stroked it out for a reason I'll explain in a moment, but I came to the repeat of the set that I had figured out was the last, or it was the first pleat. Remember, I'd shaped that front apron, folded the cloth over, found the desired depth between between a third and a quarter depth, marked this as being what my first pleat was likely to be approximately. So I'd gone as far as there and stopped. Great, everything's working out fine. So then I count the pleats. I went back to the center and I counted the pleats, and I discovered that I had 17 pleats to the right of the center line. So I'm thinking 17 twice, 34, plus a center pleat, 35 out of 37. Pretty good. I'm happy. So, but then now I do the same thing in this direction. 17 pleats, great. Now I do the same drill in this direction, right? The same procedure of marking each pleat. And I had done it until I came to this element of the tartan, the yellow stripe. And now immediately, because the end of my inside apron is there, now immediately a red flag starts to go up in my head, because if I'm that close, I'm the same distance from the edge of the inside apron as I was on the other end, 17 pleats, same difference from this, relatively, from the last pleat to the edge of the apron. But the alarm bells are starting to ring a bit, because on the other side, remember, this wasn't the first pleat. This was the first pleat, and that isn't enough distance. So I stopped for a minute. And again, I'm really, really used to doing this. So I picked it up at once, but sometimes you don't pick it up till quite a bit later, which is why it's important that we chalk and we think and we make sure we get it absolutely right at this stage. Because if that's my last pleat, it goes to the next element of the set, but only to one side of it, because then the apron goes to the other side, right? So that immediately set up an alarm bell. So when I counted them, I discovered that although I was comfortably able to have 17 pleats on this side, I can only have 16 pleats on this side. Well, I can't add another pleat here, can I? So I'm going to take one off this side. So it's going to be 16 and 16, 32, plus the middle pleat, 33. So I went back, and that's why you see this was going to be my first plate. I put strokes through it. In fact, before I actually get down to it, or at least if I was working, there'd be a number of reasons why I would stop at this point and iron this out, so there was no possibility of error. But I'm confident that I'm going to remember that in 2 stages from now, when I actually start making the kilt, that I can ignore those for a while, until I begin. So that was the 17th pleat. So I'm going to back up. This is now my first pleat. And again, remember, it's the same element. It's centered on the yellow line, as is the last pleat on the other side. So I know I'm on the right track. So then I'd marked, there's the middle of the strap and buckle. So I've taken a strap and used it to mark the edges, how big the buttonhole is going to be. So the last thing I'm going to do in this stage is make sure that I haven't skipped an element or repeated an element. And I do this by standing up and looking down on it. Okay, this is, okay, here we're at the center of the yellow line. One pleat over is to the right of the yellow line. Okay. And I'll do this. I'll literally follow it with my finger. As experienced as I am, I still do it this way. I will follow it with my finger. That's the same element of the set. And now I'm 1 over. Good. Same element of the set, 1 over. Good. Good. And I do that in both directions. I check every pleat to make sure that I haven't repeated this element twice, or I haven't skipped and gone from this green element to that green element, because these are all mistakes that it's far too easy to make, even no matter how experienced you are. If you're tired, or if you're in a hurry, or even more particularly, if it's a really busy tartan, your eye gets confused. So by literally following it with my finger, I've made sure that, okay, good, I haven't made a mistake. So at this point, I've chalked the entire kilt. Every mark that needs to be there when I pick up a needle and thread is there. So my next stage after this will be to make a little nick. In fact, I'll do it right now. To make a little nick, and rip it. This is vaguely tiring to actually do an unscripted dramatic act on live camera. Taking my good shears, now this looks alarming. Couple of things. Notice how much effort I'm putting into this. I'm really having to put my shoulders into this, because this cloth, woven by Dalgleish, really, I could describe it as the closest thing to ripstop we're ever going to find, or at least I've ever found, in a natural material, a natural cloth. It resists. I'm pushing. I'm having to use my shoulders. I'm having to use my arms, and I can feel it in my muscles. And you can smell, there's a slight smell of almost burning there. And I wonder if it's friction at some unimaginably small scale. Now, the next stage I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this up into a ball, because part of this is going to be the top band of the kilt. And when the kilt is done, the remaining material is going to accompany that kilt to its new owner. And I'm going to tell them, put this somewhere away safe, because in the future, when your body changes and we have to put a new top band on it, this is the material that'll provide the top band. If you throw it away or something else, we won't be able to do that. So there, I'll roll that up. I'm not going to do that on real time. But then the last step before I pick up and start sewing is I'm going to carefully lay this cloth back out, as you can see. And I'm being a bit ginger with it, because the more I manhandle this, the more it's going to fray. Although this stuff is so wonderfully tightly woven that it's kind of a self-sealing edge. It'll go 2 or 3 or 4 yarns, but then it'll stop. After that, it really needs to be pulled out to make it come off. And that also illustrates why I did all of my chalking before I ripped the cloth. So I'll leave you now, and I'll pick up my needle and thread after this and start sewing. I don't think that there's going to be anything dramatic or interesting enough to record about this kilt for the rest of it. But if there is, I'm sure you'll be hearing from me. Thank you.